I'm going to share something that many of you may be afraid of admitting out loud for fear of judgment. But many of the women I see who grew up in dysfunctional families, who have been parentified, who are adult children of alcoholics, they are afraid to admit that they are hesitant to be mothers, to approach motherhood or parenting, because they feel so exhausted. They feel like they have already parented their parents or their families around, or they are afraid of transmitting this generational trauma onto their children, that perhaps the traits that they are working on, they may displace them unconsciously onto their children and therefore passing on the same generational wounds. However, we also have the other subset of people that I see that are afraid that they may overcompensate and enable a lot in their children, and therefore not giving them the right tools to have the discernment and the judgment to navigate this life, because they will rely a lot on them. So these are some of the dynamics that I witnessed. So I wonder if you have ever felt this way quietly and felt guilty to admit, or fearing judgment, right? What if I become a mother? What if I pass on the same wounds? And what if I damage my child the way that I was damaged? Because for many people, the decision to have children, to become a parent, however you decide to do that, isn't just about the timing or finances or career, but it is about fear. The fear that the trauma you inherited, the emotional patterns you learned, or the nervous system that you grew up inside might somehow leak into the next generation. And let's say if you were a parentified child and an overfunctioning adult now, someone who had to grow up too soon, then this fear can be even heavier, because deep down you may think that if my parents couldn't do it right, how could I? And you know that saying, how we become just like our parents without even knowing. But the truth that most people never tell you is that the very fact that you are asking this question, it's often the strongest evidence that the cycle is already shifting. And today we're going to talk about why this fear exists and what's happening neurologically, emotionally, and how you can begin to break this fear, this cycle, whether or not you ever decide to become a parent. Hi, I'm Karina, Aybar, psychotherapist and coach, and I make videos about parentification, generational trauma, emotional regulation, and boundaries, so that you can understand why you feel the way you do and practical tools to begin to heal and grow. And by the end of this video, you will understand why people who grew up in dysfunctional families often hesitate about parenthood, how trauma creates a neurological blueprint for caregiving, and most importantly, how you can consciously break generational patterns. Because that's what we are here for, right? And now, if this topic resonates with you, I want to make sure that you stay with me in this channel, because we unpack many of these dynamics in depth every week, every Monday to be specific. So stay tuned and let's dive into the hidden fears behind motherhood hesitation. You see, one pattern I see often in my practice is that someone is thoughtful, emotionally intelligent, reflective, but when the time comes where they evaluate the topic of having children or adopting, then their nervous system freezes and they say things like, I'm scared I will repeat my parents' mistakes. Or what if I mess up my child emotionally? And sometimes they delay the decision for years. And sometimes they decide not to have children at all. They are also exhausted emotionally because they have been carrying so much and putting themselves in the back burner that they just think, why am I going to parent another child when I feel like I've been the parent all alone? And sometimes they feel guilty either way. But this hesitation is rarely about selfishness or immaturity, but it is often about conscious. Okay, I want to stress conscious, because when you grow up in a healthy environment, parenting feels like a natural next step. But when you grew up in chaos or dysfunction, or you experienced neglect, then parenthood can often trigger feelings like walking into an unknown territory. So think about it this way. Your brain is asking, what if I don't know how to do this? Because the truth is, many parentified and adult children of dysfunction didn't grow up watching healthy parenting model to them. They grew up watching survival, and many dysregulated adults around them that did not know how to cope with everyday lives, let alone dedicate enough time to validate their children's emotions, because they themselves often did not receive that validation. So in essence, the neurological blueprint that you inherited is that this fear that we need to talk about and this implicit memory, your brain doesn't only remembers as events, but it remembers it as patterns of caregiving, how emotions were handled, how conflict was handled, how comfort was offered or withheld after you potentially made a mistake or just simply didn't get it. So these experiences create what we call internal working models of relationships, and they live in deeper parts of the brain, like the amygdala and the limbic system. Not to get technical here, but think about it. When someone considers becoming a parent, their nervous system automatically scans those early templates. And if those templates included emotional volatility, emotional neglect, lack of validation, lots of criticism, and unpredictable behaviors, black and white thinking, one moment we're fine, the other moment we're just scared, then the nervous system may react with alarm. And not because you are destined to repeat the cycle, but because your brain and your body learned that caregiving is volatile. You might have internalized yourself that you were hard to raise, that you were a difficult child because you had a dysregulated parent that was stressed all the time. So for many adults who grew up in dysfunction, caregiving wasn't joyful. It was overwhelming for many of your parents or your family members. So you were already managing these adults' emotions or solving family problems early on and protecting siblings or suppressing your own needs so that you do not cause more conflicts or more stress in an already stressed family system. So when people say, having kids will complete you, having kids is a blessing, and don't get me wrong, I am a mother myself, and it is a blessing, that's my opinion, but it is complex work. It's not easy. So your nervous system might quietly respond to these claims like, oof, I already raised a family once. So why would I ask for more stress and to potentially damage another human? Does this resonate? Please let me know in the comments, because this is very common in my practice. Let's talk about the parentified daughter's unique fear that arises and that I experienced myself in the past. I want to share with you the story of one of my clients. Let's call her Sarah, right? She was the emotional mediator in the family, and her mother confided in her about adult problems. She could also witness how her mother was so overwhelmed and her father was not there. So Sarah's mother was a single parent, and whenever they would interact, both of her parents, there would be a lot of arguments. So by age 10, 11, Sarah learned that, you have to stay calm when others explode, and you have to keep the peace, and you have to suppress your own needs so that you don't contribute to the conflict that's already there. And so now in her 30s, Sarah sees that her friends are having children and she feels something complicated, right? Part of her wants to have a family, but another part of her thinks, I don't know that I'm ready for this. Why would I bring this stress onto my life? But then I'm being perceived as selfish, right? Or what if I lose myself again in this process? So this is very complex, and I want you to be compassionate with yourself if you are experiencing these emotions, because parenting already feels heavy, and it could feel associated with exhaustion. It could be associated with emotional responsibility immediately or losing autonomy. And that fear is completely understandable. As an adult child of a dysfunctional family, we often associate caregiving with self-erasure and sacrifice. And the goal here is to strike a balance, ideally. Now, the good news is that awareness changes everything, and that is what I'm hoping that you will take away from this conversation today. Trauma patterns are not destiny. In fact, research in attachment psychology shows something fascinating about attachment, and it is that people who reflect on their childhood experiences and actively work to understand how they attach, how they relate, often develop what's called earned secure attachment. You can definitely rewrite the script, and it doesn't have to be with an intimate partner. It could be with friends and chosen family, or so what I like to call, your chosen family, your friends, and people that are not necessarily blood related, but that can be there for you and can validate you and are aware and conscious as you are. Because through awareness, healing, and intentional relationships, your brain and your body creates a new relational pattern. Neuroplasticity happens, the brain's ability to change, and that caregiving blueprint that you inherited can evolve, and you can create your own blueprint for next generations, and even people that you haven't birthed, just inspiring family around you, right? That is why it is important to first reparent yourself. Now, many people think that breaking generational cycles starts when you have children, but actually, it often starts long before that, as many of you may know. It starts when you begin giving yourself what you didn't receive growing up. For example, learning how to soothe yourself when you feel overwhelmed is the first step. Learning to identify why you feel the way you do in moments where you are triggered. Learning that your needs matter, that your nervous system is signaling something to you, and learning that conflict doesn't equal abandonment. These internal experiences begin reshaping the nervous system. And here's the irony. Many people who fear becoming a parent or a bad parent often become extremely thoughtful parents, precisely because they have done the work and this inner work that is necessary to know yourself, to be aware of your responses, to not be reactive but be proactive, because we have response ability, the ability to respond in situations. And the aim is to be good enough parents, because there are no perfect parents out there that I'm aware of, right? Wonderful parents, but none of them are perfect, including myself, of course. Absolutely not. So breaking generational patterns, it's only the beginning, and it's not cognitive, it's also somatic. Making this beautiful transition involves becoming aware of your emotions and noticing how your body reacts when you imagine parenting. What does that feel like? Do you feel tightness in your chest? Do you feel heaviness in your stomach, on your throat? Do you feel anxiety or dread? Make sure that you pinpoint how visualizing becoming a parent or caretaker makes you feel. Instead of judging that reaction, simply acknowledge it. Your nervous system may be revealing old memories of overwhelm, and awareness is the first step to changing that pattern. Another helpful practice that I want to offer you is to practice safe repair. One of the most powerful parenting skills isn't perfection, it is repair. In healthy relationships, mistakes happen, as you know, but they are repaired through empathy and accountability. You can practice this in your current relationships by saying things like, you know what? I realized that I acted defensively and I am sorry. Can we try again? Or I can see why you will feel that way. I'm sorry I made you feel that way. Because as you can see, repair teaches the nervous system that conflict doesn't destroy connection. It is an opportunity to deepen the relationship. And being able to take accountability with a child, with anyone, makes tremendous strides and repair so that you can be authentic. And many parentified daughters and adult children of dysfunction hold themselves to impossible standards. They think that if I ever become a parent, I must never make mistakes, or I must know and anticipate my child's need. They often want to read many books on parenting, but the reality is that perfection is not healthy parenting. You may actually transmit that unhealthy perfectionism that you may have internalized. But connection is the key. So try replacing the inner critic with something like, I am learning new ways of relating. And that is the best that we can do. I often make a lot of mistakes with my own son, and I feel like a terrible parent. And then I realize that as long as I repair and I do my best, that is what matters. Is my child going to hold me accountable in the future and have resentment? Absolutely. Just like I resent, but I also love my mother, for instance. But you don't need to resolve the question of parenthood immediately, because this is not a race. This is a very conscious decision that it may not be fit for you, and that's okay. And you shouldn't do it out of pressure. Right? Some people decide to become parents, some decide not to, and both choices can come from clarity rather than fear. And what matters most is the fact that the decision becomes intentional, and it's a conscious decision to move forward in whatever direction you feel in alignment with your values and your circumstances, and not simply a reaction to inherited trauma. So let me leave you with something important. The cycle of trauma often continues when people never question it. But the moment someone becomes aware and begins asking, what do I want to do differently? Then something powerful happens. Awareness enters the system. Reflection enters the system. Compassion enters the system. And you see, that's often how generational trauma and healing begins, not with perfection, but with consciousness. Now, if this conversation resonated with you, know that many thoughtful, emotionally aware people wrestle with these questions as well. And these are exactly the kinds of conversations that we continue exploring in this channel. So please stay with me and feel free to explore more of my videos. Look into our Dysfunctional Families, Parentification, and Complex Trauma Resources playlist. And if something in this video spoke to you, I would love to hear from you in the comments. I read each of them. Have you ever worried about repeating the patterns that you grew up with? Your reflection and your sharing may help someone else that may be feeling ashamed. So let us know in the comments. I would love to connect with you, and I will see you in the next video. And please remember your resilience.